The latest book that I've been working on and that has come out, and I've started to do more speaking and talking about, is this book called The Children of Divorce. It has this kind of long, philosophical, maybe convoluted subtitle, which is The Loss of Family as the Loss of Being. And in many ways, that's the thesis of the book. I had talked about being married and going through a crisis in our family of origin. And really the crisis was that both of our parents' marriages fell apart over our engagement. And then, of course, followed of that over our first year of marriage. And so and as I said earlier as well, that theology, to me, and ministry where they come together is really this deep reflection on our experience. And so as I was a student and started a doctoral program and started reading a lot of theology and reading a lot of philosophy, I was also trying to wrestle with this fact that my parents were splitting apart and what this meant and how to make sense of it. So it finally took until after I had finished my own degree and started working on a new book to write this one. But my argument really is that the way we've tended to look at the experience of divorce for children particularly, and by children I mean 2 years old to 42 years old. I mean, when, you are a child of your parents divorcing. And I've tried to argue that we tended to overlook maybe the biggest issue of divorce, that we've tended to see it as an issue of privilege or an issue of knowledge. In other words, we want kids to know that divorce wasn't their fault, and we want to make sure that they don't lose certain economic advantage. So we want them to hold on to what social theorists called social capital, the capital of relationships in the schools they go to, and the network of connections. And all that stuff, again, I think is really important. But for me, and for connected to some of the research I've done, the really driving question for young people is not knowledge or structure. It's this question of, how do I be at all? And how do I act now that these people who are literally responsible in their communion for bringing me into the world are pulling apart their relationship? That I concretely exist because they came together and formed a world, and now that world has been pulled apart. So that's really the exploration of this book, and I think churches would do well to find ways to recognize maybe what I call the ontological issue of divorce. And really, when we all have shaken ontology, when our being is shaken, what we'd really need is someone, much like the relationship conversation, to be with us, to articulate and call a thing what it is, and to say how difficult this is. And the research shows in really staggering ways that when young people go through divorce, no one in the church really says anything, and that they kind of have to deal with this transition and these huge, big questions by themselves. And so I guess part of the push of the book is for us to recognize that human beings in and of themselves are social beings. So what does it mean when this most primary social relationship of mother and father regrets ever being together? Or at least presently regrets ever being together, and yet you literally have both of those people existing inside you, and somehow you need to negotiate that. And so in my own country, it has not necessarily been, well, let me just say it's been a polarizing book, and I still, when I write little online articles or whatever, the comments are always some that say, oh, you've said exactly how I've felt for 10 years, and others that say, you're a whack job, that's good, you just care about keeping the family, blah, 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 blah. So it's a book that I really wrote and continue to talk about in fear and trembling in many ways, because it's not an easy thing to talk about. Because divorce, whether it's your parents who have divorced or you're the person who has gone through a divorce, is incredibly painful. And there's ways that you get sucked so deeply, like every fiber of your being gets sucked into it, that it really becomes a difficult situation. But this is really what's hard for kids, is that it is such a difficult time for parents that usually young people don't feel like they have anyone to talk about how difficult it is for them. Or mom, it's been a liberation for mom to no longer have to live with dad, who's been less than affirming to her, but the kid still feels bad because she misses her dad, but can she say that with her mom? Because it'll just makes her mom defensive, and so you feel stuck in all of these things, and so that's really the exploration of the book. And I really do think, at least in my cultural context, divorce, which is such a far-reaching cultural reality, that the church has failed. The church simply has failed to talk about it. And when we have talked about it, we've talked about it moralistically, like it's bad. The Bible doesn't like it, or following maybe the cultural current. It's not that big of a deal. As long as everyone's happy, it's okay. And so part of the book is trying to argue that happiness is not an ontological category, but community and relationship is much more ontological. And what if we looked at divorce in that way?